This is Chapter 13, Discussion Number 3, Britain's Colonies Morph. Now, while the other Western powers in Japan are starting to gather to themselves colonies of their own, the greatest colonial power of the time, the British Empire, is starting to realize that their huge empire is very expensive to maintain and distracts the United Kingdom from its main goals of maintaining its economic power, as they have to spend a whole bunch of time dealing with all these different nationalities. And so a lot of the British colonies become self-ruling, where they still answer somewhat to the United Kingdom as a confederation. The United Kingdom can still tell them what to do as far as when it comes to defending themselves against outside invaders. They're still part of the British economic system, but they have a lot of autonomy as well. Now, the first country we're going to talk about gaining its autonomy as part of the United Kingdom Dominion is Canada. Now, remember that Canada first started as a French colony, and then the British won Canada from the French during the French and Indian War, the 7 Years' War. And then the British started spreading themselves out all across North America, north of the United States, and established several different colonial identities or provinces in that area. Now, in 1840, an Act of Union was passed by the British government, or by the British Parliament, to unite Upper Canada and Lower Canada, which is what is Ontario and Quebec, make them a united colony. Now, a term that you might want to hear is that we had a lot of mixing of local indigenous populations, we would call them the Native Americans, between the French and the British. Those three, a lot of mixing. The French Canadians and the Native Americans especially had a lot of mixing of the families, and their offspring are called the Métis. So that might be a term that you might run into. Now, also in 1867, this would be after the American Civil War, the British North America Act united all the different colonies in British North America, what we would call Canada, into one consideration. So Canada, which was Ontario and Quebec, united with Prince Edward Island, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and also the western provinces, such as Manitoba, British Columbia, Alberta. Those types of provinces also all became one united area. So now they did the same thing as the United States did, where we had all these western lands, but somehow they weren't part of the regular United States parts. So while we built our transcontinental railroad, Canada did the same thing, going across all the western provinces. But Canada also had a lot of the same problems that we did in the United States, dealing with the Native Americans and the lands that they claimed as their own, and then the Western power pushing them and saying, we're taking the land, we're making better use of it, get out of our way, and they, like I said, they had the same problems that we did. But Canada also had some other problems that made it difficult for them besides the cold. First of all, the United States had kind of gotten a head start on Canada on establishing itself as a power on the continent. And so a lot of the United States actions made it hard for Canada to be independent, dealing with Western power and dealing with the indigenous populations, and that sort of thing. And also because of their history, where the French had a strong establishment, and then the British just kind of tolerated them, let them be, and then the Indians, and then the English, all these three different groups of people really had a hard time melding and establishing their identity as Canadians. And so dealing with these three different populations and what they wanted to do didn't exactly make running Canada very easy. Now, a couple of other British colonies start kind of going off on their own, and one would be Australia. Now, Australia starts as a penal colony, where the peons were sent. Now, people, if you were bankrupt and you owed people money, you had to work off the debt. and it was essentially a prison colony forcing you to work off your debt, and you were referred to as a peon, or you were forced into peonage, which is where people were imprisoned to pay off their debts. So Australia became a favorite place to ship people in order to earn the money that in order to get out of debt. The Aborigines, who were people who were already there in Australia, lost much of their uniqueness after the Europeans came in. They just did not maintain themselves, keep their identity. A lot of times they just kind of glommed onto the British and took their identity, or they went out into the bush and became, what we kind of think of as Aborigines now. Now, Australia actually ended up as several different colonies in the same way that Canada, though, was united. Australia was also united, and then British also gave them self-rule once the idea of working off your debt in prison kind of went out of accepted Western culture. One thing I want to make sure you do realize, the Australian ballot's very important, even in the United States, because the Australians were the first ones that allowed people to use secret ballots in their elections. Now that's important because if your boss knew how you voted, your boss could tell you, if you want to keep your job, vote for who I want. And that would multiply boss's votes and not really a true rendering of what the people wanted. And so the idea of secret ballot comes into the United States, and that idea allows people to vote their conscience instead of being threatened possibly by jobs or by other reasons in order to influence people's votes. Another colony down near Australia, New Zealand, was originally populated by a group of people called the Maori. Now, while they didn't disappear, they essentially moved into the mountains, and they kept to themselves, and they established themselves and pretty much have kept their identity as an indigenous farming community. Now, in the same way that American Indian populations, when the Spanish and the English and the Portuguese come into the New World and they bring all of their diseases and wiped out a lot of the population, the Maori went through the same idea. They went from 200,000 to 45,000 after warring with the European powers and disease and other misfortunes, but they are still an identified group in that region. So that's three different major British colonial empires that started to establish themselves separately. They're still part of the Confederation of the British Dominion, but they also have established themselves a lot of self-rule during this time period. This concludes Chapter 13's discussion number 3, Britain's Colonies Morph.